What's up, guys? So today I want to talk about unilateral experiments, or basically training one side of the body differently than the other. So if you're familiar with my channel and some of the podcasts, you've probably heard me talk about this unilateral calf experiment that I've been doing. And it's actually over 2 years now. And what I've been doing is just training my right calf. You might think, why would somebody do that? The reason being that I have particularly stubborn calves. They have not grown since I was about 17 years old, despite being as much as 40 pounds heavier than then. So basically, when I started, they were probably 11 or 12 inches. They grew up to 15 inches. I'll throw in a picture here where they are now. And basically, they have not grown since then, despite putting on another 2+ inches on my arms, despite gaining a tremendous amount of strength in other muscle groups. They have really just not progressed. Now, I've tried everything under the sun, high volume, low volume, just doing partials, just like emphasizing the stretch. I've tried everything you could think of. And, everybody's got their secret calf technique. I saw some Instagram post where somebody said, is it really genetic, or is it just that you're not doing this thing? And like this thing was just like a stretch, which is very basic, right? You've got some studies out there showing that the stretch is more important. But of course, I've tried that. I've tried everything there. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, it is what it is at this point. But I'm curious, would it even matter if I trained it at this point? So I stopped training the left calf and nothing happened. And I was actually even surprised by that. I do not think that would necessarily be the case for everybody. I know Abel Chabai has mentioned that he has not been training his calves much, and they have actually shrunk. So as Eric Helms mentioned in our recent podcast, this might just be a Dave's calf thing. But it was an experiment that I wouldn't have known the results of unless I tried it. And so it's not any harder for me to do this than how I was training before. So I'm just going to keep doing it. But I think after 2 years, we can more or less conclude that it's not really going to change anything. Now, as a general rule, though, you can use these unilateral experiments to figure out things for other muscle groups. So for instance, I was wondering, am I doing enough volume for my lower body, like my thighs? And so I added more volume specifically to my left thigh. Lo and behold, I had probably backed off a little bit too much because I used to do very high leg training. I then switched to only actually doing about 3 to 6 sets per, like hamstring or quads. And then I bumped it up, and lo and behold, I actually did put on size on my left. So that had really indicated to me I probably lost a little bit of size on my right, or just on both legs in general. And then since adding more to the left, it began to grow. So I had gained about 1/2 inch on my left thigh over a 6-month period. That's pretty significant, especially after training this long. So I realized, okay, I'm not doing enough volume there. So this could be a way that you could experiment, because everybody wonders, how much volume should I be doing? And obviously there's a lot of factors here. But one thing you could do is say, well, am I going to benefit from more volume? Am I going to benefit from these intensity techniques? Am I going to benefit from this different exercise? You can try it out and compare. So for instance, let's say, because I've done certainly arm specialization phases as well, my left arm is smaller than my right arm. And that's basically been the case throughout my entire training career. It's always been about 1/2 inch smaller. So they have progressed together, but have not ever been even. Now, at times I've gotten that to as little as 1/4 inch if I did a big specialization phase for my left arm. But then once I got back to regular volume, it shrunk back again. So, and I don't think it really shrunk. I think it was just probably an inflammatory response. It was just kind of had this perma pump going on because of the high volume. And then it went back to normal. And it probably, in my case, has to do with insertions. Some people would say, oh, well, you use your right hand more. I've actually switched a lot of daily tasks to my left arm. So like when I carry in groceries, I actually usually carry with my left arm. I brush my teeth with my left arm. So I've done a lot of those things to try to balance it out. It's never actually made any difference. But I bring that up because let's say you have 2 15-inch arms and you want to know, should I try this new exercise? Is it actually going to be beneficial? It's very hard to know over such a slow process of muscle growth if something is actually making a difference. And so you can just do what most people do and look at the studies, kind of look at the mechanisms, look at the EMG data, look at a lot of different data points and say, well, based on that, I would conclude that I should probably be doing this exercise over that. And that's fine. However, one other way to do it would be to say, hey, you know what? I've never done a spider curl, and I don't know if I want to have this exercise in for the rest of my training career. So you could say, hey, on my left arm, I'm going to do a spider curl. I'm going to add that in or replace what I was already doing with that. And on my right arm, I'm going to continue doing what I was already doing. And if after 6 months, they've continued to grow at the same rate, then fine. The spider curl isn't any worse and it's not any better. But if you notice, wow, like actually I've gained a quarter of an inch on my left arm, whereas my right arm has barely budged, maybe gained a 16th of an inch, maybe there really was something to that exercise. So for trying things out, you can do that. Now, obviously this isn't going to apply to everything, right? You can't just say, hey, I want to try a bench press over, a machine press and I'm going to do a one arm bench press. Like that doesn't make a lot of sense given it's a barbell movement, but there are things where you could try this. Now, it takes some patience because these results can take a while to find the results, right? I'd say if you're even an intermediate, let alone advanced, you might have to do something like this for 6 months. There's, as I mentioned, some limitations with the exercises that you could do. And it will be a little bit more time intensive, right? Because if you're doing things one arm at a time compared to doing them at the same time, it is obviously going to take more time. But if you're at a point where you want to try something, you want to experiment, maybe you're getting a little bored with your training, this is something you can do. Now, one thing that people might bring up as an objection is, hey, isn't there a crossover effect? And that actually is true. However, that is generally a neurological thing and more to do with strength. So for instance, let's say you take somebody who is untrained and you were to have them do a strength test at 10 rep max. Then you had them just train their left leg for 3 months. After that period, their right leg would also be a little bit stronger. And this has been found in a number of studies at this point. However, when you look at muscle growth, that doesn't tend to be the case. I think I've seen maybe one study where there was a little bit of muscle growth in the untrained leg, but for the most part, that is a neurological phenomenon. And so that really wouldn't be too much of a hindrance. And again, I kind of demonstrated that myself with the thighs, right? So my left thigh did actually grow while my right thigh did not. So I do think it's a viable experiment. And a final way that I will mention is something that Kasim Hansen, he's been on the podcast, he recently made an Instagram post, and I will probably try this out myself. So basically what he did was he did this kind of side pull-in where you're coming down like this as a pre-exhaust, followed by a traditional lat movement. And again, I can kind of put in that clip here. And then he, on the other side, did no pre-exhaust, and he went right to that lat movement. And he found that he got the exact same number of reps, indicating that this exercise, this kind of like pull in here, was not a good pre-exhaust because it didn't, in theory, did not fatigue the lats at all. Now, I want to actually try that experiment. Abel and Brian Borstein and I have all mentioned that we will try this and kind of report back and see what our own results are. But that is another example where unilateral experimentation led to a conclusion within the individual, because we can look at studies, we can look at large sample sizes and all of that, but being able to experiment on yourself is important. And I think unilateral experiments should be done more often. I really don't hear almost anybody mention it. Seeing Kasim do that was interesting, and he's one of the first people I've seen besides myself mentioning some of these things. I'm sure other people have done it and mentioned it, but I just don't see it talked about that much. And I understand that it can be a little inconvenient. So I'm definitely not saying everybody go out and do this. But I do think if you want to experiment with different exercises, intensity techniques, or amounts of volume to train a certain muscle group, you can do this and see. And maybe you're somebody who's doing 20 sets per week. And if you cut the other side back down to 10, maybe you'll find that you didn't need all that volume. Or if you've been kind of sandbagging it and you're saying, hey, I really want to do minimalist volume, and then you double the volume on one side and it grows more, hey, maybe you actually need to kind of look at your training and step back and say, hey, you know what? I haven't been going hard enough. So I think it's an interesting way to experiment. So it's a relatively short video today, guys. I just want to put this out there. I've kind of mentioned it here and there on the podcast, but I've never really gone into a lot of detail about it. So those are some of the ones I've done. I'd be interested to hear if anybody here has experimented with that. And if you're interested in me trying other unilateral experiments, post down below, comment your thoughts on this method, subscribe to the channel for more like this, give it a like, and I will see you guys next time.